I stood frozen as Mom declared my younger brother would inherit the entire family empire because I was strong enough without it. My brother smirked, unaware that earlier that day, I'd uncovered the devastating financial crater he'd secretly dug, one that would bury him alive. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders like a wet wool coat I couldn't take off. I had driven 4 hours to get to the estate, battling a migraine that sat behind my left eye like a brewing storm, only to walk into a room that felt more like a courtroom than a dining hall. The crystal chandelier above the mahogany table was dimmed, casting long, melodramatic shadows across the faces of my family. My mother, Patricia, sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid, her fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the linen tablecloth. To her right sat Lucas, my younger brother, leaning back in his chair with a glass of the good scotch, Dad's scotch, resting on his knee. He looked like a king in waiting, his smile too wide, his eyes too bright. And then there was Dad, Connor. He sat opposite Lucas, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. His skin was gray, his breathing shallow. He wouldn't look at me. That was the first sign that the floor was about to drop out from under me. "Claire, darling, you look tired," Patricia said, though her tone suggested that my fatigue was a personal failing rather than a biological reality. "I hope you're listening. We have important business to discuss." "I'm listening, Mom," I said, my voice rasping slightly. I took a sip of water, trying to wash away the metallic taste of anxiety. "I'm just recovering from that bout of pneumonia, remember? The doctors said I need rest." "Yes, well, we all have our burdens," she dismissed, waving a hand adorned with diamonds that cost more than my first car. "But this is about the future, the legacy." She stood up then, clearing her throat. The performance was beginning. "Your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking," Patricia began, her gaze shifting adoringly to Lucas, who preened under the attention. "We have decided to settle the estate now, while we are all here, to avoid any confusion later on." I saw Connor flinch. He reached for his water glass, his hand trembling so violently that water sloshed over the rim. He still didn't look at me. "Claire," Patricia turned her eyes to me, and they were cold, devoid of the warmth a mother should have for a daughter who had spent the last decade building her own life from scratch. "You have done remarkably well for yourself. You have your career in the city, your own apartment, your independence. You are a survivor. You always have been." I nodded slowly, a cold dread pooling in my stomach. "Thank you." "Lucas, on the other hand," she continued, her voice softening into something syrupy, needs stability. "He needs a foundation to build upon. He has such vision for the company, but he needs the assets to make it happen." She took a deep breath, delivering the blow with the precision of an executioner. "Therefore, we have decided that Lucas will inherit the house, the land, and the entirety of the manufacturing business. Effective immediately, the title transfer process begins." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, counting down the seconds of my humiliation. "Everything," I whispered, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. "The business I helped modernize, the house where I grew up." "You don't need it, Claire," Patricia said, her tone final. "You're already doing fine on your own. Lucas needs this. It's only fair." Lucas took a slow sip of his scotch, his eyes locking with mine. The smugness radiating off him was palpable, a heat wave of arrogance. "Don't be greedy, sis," he said, his voice smooth and oily. "You always said you didn't want to be tied down to this town. I'm doing you a favor." I looked at Connor. "Dad," I asked, pleading for him to speak, to inject some sanity into this madness. He finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, filled with a mixture of sorrow and terror that I couldn't quite parse. He opened his mouth to speak, but Patricia cut him off with a sharp look. "Your father agrees," she snapped. "This is best for the family." The betrayal hit me harder than the fever I'd fought off just weeks ago. It wasn't about the money. I didn't care about the sprawling house or the antique furniture. It was the message. It was the confirmation that in the ledger of my mother's heart, I was an asset to be liquidated, while Luca's was an investment to be protected at all costs. I looked at Luca's, really looked at him, and for the first time in years I didn't my annoying little brother. I saw a shark in a suit that didn't quite fit, but as the shock began to fade, replaced by the icy clarity of my profession, I realized something else. They thought they were cutting me out of a fortune. They had no idea they were locking Luca's inside a burning building. I placed my hands on the table to steady myself, the wood cool under my palms. "Okay," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "if that's your decision." Patricia let out a breath she seemed to have been holding. "Good, I'm glad you're being sensible." I wasn't being sensible. I was being merciful. Because the betrayal I felt in that moment was worse than the diagnosis itself, worse than the years of neglect. It was a declaration of war, and I was the only one in the room who knew that the enemy had already planted the bomb. Dinner proceeded with a grotesque normalcy that made my skin crawl. Patricia chattered on about the renovations. Luca's was planning for the East Wing, asking my opinion on color palettes as if she hadn't just stripped me of my birthright. Luca's sat there, nodding along, occasionally interjecting with grandiose ideas about expanding the business into international markets. Ideas that sounded impressive if you didn't know the first thing about supply chains or solvency. I picked at my roast beef, the meat turning to ash in my mouth. Every bite was a struggle against the urge to scream, to flip the table, to shake my mother until she saw the reality standing right in front of her. But I didn't. I was a professional. My job was to find the truth in the numbers, to remain objective when everyone else was emotional. "I think a minimalist aesthetic for the office," Lucas was saying, waving his fork. "Glass walls, open concept, we need to project transparency." I almost choked on my water. Transparency. The irony was rich enough to cause gout. "That sounds expensive," I managed to say, keeping my tone neutral. "You have to spend money to make money, Claire," Lucas shot back, a condescending smirk playing on his lips. "That's the problem with your little accounting job. You look at pennies, I look at potential." "My little accounting job involves forensic audits for Fortune 500 companies, Lucas," I reminded him quietly. "I look for fraud. I look for the things people try to hide." The table went quiet for a split second. Lucas's smile faltered just a fraction before he recovered. "Right. Well, we run a clean ship here. Nothing to hide." Patricia beamed at him. "Of course not. Your father built this company on integrity." I glanced at Connor again. He was staring at his plate, pushing peas around with his fork. He hadn't eaten a bite. Under the table, I saw his leg bouncing nervously. He knew. He had to know. But the fear radiating off him was confusing. Was he afraid of Patricia, or was he afraid of what was coming? After dinner, the family retreated to the drawing room for coffee. I excused myself, claiming my migraine had returned with a vengeance. I needed air. I needed to think. I walked out onto the veranda, the cool night air hitting my flushed face. The estate grounds stretched out before me, shadowed and imposing. This was supposed to be Lucas's kingdom now. I pulled my phone from my pocket and unlocked the secure folder I had synced earlier that morning. It was all there. The PDF files, the bank statements, the shell company registrations. I scrolled through them, the blue light illuminating the grim reality of the clean ship Lucas was running. He had been helping Dad with the books for the last 2 years as Dad's health declined. Patricia saw it as Lucas stepping up. I saw it for what it was, a slow, methodical siphoning of the company's lifeblood. "Claire." I jumped, locking the phone instantly and shoving it into my pocket. I turned to see Connor standing in the doorway, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked frail, a ghost of the man who used to carry me on his shoulders. "Dad," I said, moving to help him, "you shouldn't be out here without a coat. It's freezing." "I'm fine," he wheezed, waving me off, though he accepted my arm for support. We walked to the stone railing, looking out over the dark garden. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words were carried away by the wind, barely audible. "About the inheritance?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. "It's okay, Dad. I don't need the money. I really don't." "No," he said, shaking his head violently. "Not about the money, about letting it happen." He turned to me, his eyes wet. "Your mother, she doesn't see. She refuses to see. She thinks he's the second coming of the family name." "I know," I said. "She always has." Connor gripped my arm, his fingers digging into my sweater with surprising strength. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "I saw the laptop," he hissed. "Last week. He left it open in the study. I saw the transfers, Claire to the Caymans, to that company. Apex Holdings." My blood ran cold, he knew. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. "I tried," Connor's voice cracked. "I tried to tell her. She said I was confused. She said the medication was messing with my head. She said Lucas explained it all, that it was tax optimization. She trusts him blindly, Claire, and if I push too hard." He trailed off, looking back toward the house where Patricia held court. "She controls my medical care. She controls the proxies. I'm trapped." I looked at my father, seeing the utter defeat in his posture. He wasn't just sick. He was a hostage in his own home, gaslit by his wife and manipulated by his son. "He's going to ruin us," Connor whispered. "If he gets the business fully, within 6 months there won't be a business. There will be indictments." I placed my hand over his trembling one. "Dad, listen to me." "Please," he begged, tears spilling over. "Please tell them what you showed me, or what I saw. You have to stop this. I can't do it alone." I squeezed his hand. "I know. I found it too. I did a background run on the company EIN yesterday because I noticed some irregularities in the quarterly reports you sent me last month." His eyes widened. "You know." "I know everything," I confirmed. "I know about Apex Holdings. I know about the gambling debts in Vegas. I know about the second mortgage he took out on the warehouse without your signature." Connor let out a sob of relief, slumping against the railing. "But they had forgotten one crucial thing," I said, my voice hardening as I looked back at the house, where Lucas's laughter drifted through the open window. "They forgot that I don't just count money, I hunt it. To understand why this night was so inevitable, you have to understand the architecture of my family. It wasn't built on love, it was built on a very specific hierarchy. Lucas was the miracle. He was born when Patricia was 42, long after they thought they were done having children. I was 4 years old, a quiet, observant child, and suddenly I was invisible. Lucas was a colicky, demanding baby, and he grew into a demanding, reckless adult. But to Patricia, every mistake he made was simply the world failing to understand his genius. Failed math, the teacher was incompetent. Crashed the car, the road was poorly designed. Caught stealing from the petty cash at the business when he was 16, he was just showing initiative and learning how cash flow worked. I, on the other hand, was the utility player. I was the one who studied late, who got the scholarships, who worked 3 jobs in college so I wouldn't have to ask for a dime. I became a forensic accountant because I craved order. I craved a world where things added up, where actions had consequences, and where the truth couldn't be charmed away by a dimpled smile. I had spent the last 5 years quietly consulting for the family business, pro bono, fixing their tax filings, streamlining their payroll, and modernizing their inventory systems. I did it because I loved Dad, and I wanted to protect his legacy. But Lucas had returned home 2 years ago after burning out in a marketing job in the city, a job I later found out he was fired from for sexual harassment. Patricia welcomed him back like a war hero. She installed him as the director of operations, a title that meant he walked around in a suit, barked orders at employees who had been there for 20 years, and took 3-hour lunches. I walked back into the drawing room, my resolve hardening into diamond. Patricia was pouring more coffee. Lucas was checking his watch, likely bored of performing for his audience. "There she is," Lucas drawled. Feeling better, or did the reality of being disinherited give you a headache? Actually, I'm feeling very clear-headed, I said, taking a seat on the stiff velvet sofa. Dad and I were just catching up. Lucas's eyes flickered to the doorway where Connor was slowly shuffling back in. A shadow of suspicion crossed Lucas's face. Catching up on what? Old times, I lied smoothly, and the future. Speaking of the future, Patricia interjected, handing me a cup of coffee I didn't want. Lucas has some wonderful ideas for the staff. He's thinking of bringing in a whole new management team. Younger, hungrier. Firing the loyal staff, I asked, raising an eyebrow. People like Mrs. Higgins who have been with us since the garage days. Dead weight, Lucas said dismissively. We need agility. You wouldn't understand, Claire. You're too risk-averse. That's why you're an accountant. You look backward. Entrepreneurs look forward. He stood up and walked over to the fireplace, leaning his arm on the mantel in a pose that looked rehearsed. By the way, he said, his tone shifting to something sharper. I noticed you've been logging into the company server remotely. I'm going to have it revoke those credentials tomorrow. Security risk. My heart skipped a beat, but I EPT my face impassive. I was finishing up the Q3 audit I promised Dad. We don't need audits from outsiders anymore, Lucas said, his voice dropping an octave. I have my own people handling the books now, people who understand my vision. Your people, I asked. You mean the firm in the city or someone else? That's none of your concern, he snapped, the veneer of charm cracking. It's my company now, or it will be as soon as the lawyers finish the paperwork on Monday. He stared at me, his eyes cold and predatory. He was trying to intimidate me. He was trying to mark his territory. He thought he had won. He thought the game was over because the referee, Mom, had declared him the winner. He didn't realize we were playing two different games. He was playing King of the Hill. I was playing Capture the Flag, and I was currently holding the flag, the map, and the keys to the armory. Monday, I repeated thoughtfully. That's very soon. Efficiency, Patricia chimed in. Lucas is very efficient. I looked at my mother, seeing the desperate hope in her eyes. She wanted this so badly. She wanted her golden boy to be the titan she imagined. She was willing to sacrifice me, sacrifice Dad's mental health, and sacrifice the livelihoods of 50 employees just to keep that fantasy alive. It was tragic, truly. But I wasn't going to let them drag me down with the ship. Well, I said, setting my coffee cup down with a deliberate clink. If everything is being signed over on Monday, there are a few things we should probably clarify tonight, just to make sure the transition is smooth. Lucas narrowed his eyes. What kind of things? Liabilities, I said softly. Outstanding debts, you know, the boring stuff. We have no debts, Patricia said haughtily. Your father paid off the mortgage 5 years ago. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. I wasn't talking about the house, Mom. The word liabilities hung in the air like smoke in a windowless room. Patricia frowned, her brow furrowing as she looked from me to Lucas. For a second, the silence was absolute, save for the crackling of the logs in the fireplace. Don't be dramatic, Claire, Patricia finally said, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. Every business has operating costs. Lucas has explained all of this to us. It's called leverage. Leverage is when you use debt to finance growth, I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. Liability is what happens when you owe more than you're worth. And right now, from what I've seen, the company isn't just leveraged. It's hemorrhaging. Lucas stepped away from the mantel. His face had gone rigid, the charming smile completely erased. I told you, Mom, she's jealous. She comes in here after being gone for months and tries to undermine me because she's upset about the house. He turned his glare on me. You don't know the first thing about my strategy, Claire. Stick to your spreadsheets. I intend to, I replied, standing up. I'm going to bed. But Lucas, if I were you, I'd make sure that clean ship of yours is watertight, because leaks have a nasty habit of sinking captains. I walked out of the room, feeling their eyes boring into my back. I didn't look at Dad. I couldn't risk exposing him yet. Once inside my old bedroom, a space that had been slowly stripped of my personality over the years to make room for guest amenities, I locked the door. I didn't turn on the main light. Instead, I sat at the small desk by the window, opened my laptop, and booted up my proprietary forensic software. I had mirrored the company server 3 days ago. It was a standard precaution I took whenever I did work for family, mostly so I wouldn't have to rely on their terrible internet connection. But now, it was my weapon. I started digging. Forensic accounting isn't about math, it's about psychology. It's about understanding human behavior. Fraudsters are rarely creative. They are arrogant. They think that if they hide a transaction under a boring label like consulting fees or miscellaneous supply chain logistics, no one will look twice. I pulled up the general ledger for the last 18 months. The first thing that stood out was a recurring payment to a vendor listed as Apex Strategic Solutions. The payments started small, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, just enough to fly under the radar of a standard automated audit. But 6 months ago, they had spiked. $50,000, $80,000. Last month alone, a transfer of $150,000. I ran a search on Apex Strategic Solutions. The address on the invoice led to a UPS store in a strip mall in Nevada, a classic shell. I cross-referenced the dates of the transfers with Lucas's social media, which he foolishly kept public because he wanted to be an influencer, CEO. Transfer date, March 14th. Amount, $45,000. Lucas's Instagram post, March 16th. New wheels, hard work pays off. A photo of a vintage Porsche. Chi 911. Transfer date, June 2nd. Amount, $75,000. Lucas's geolocation, June 3rd, The Wynn, Las Vegas. High roller suite, betting on myself. My stomach turned. He wasn't even laundering it well. He was treating the company operating account like his personal piggy bank, siphoning off liquidity to fund a lifestyle he hadn't earned. But then I found something worse. Buried in the subledger for capital improvements, I found a loan agreement. It wasn't from a bank. It was from a private equity firm I recognized from a case I'd worked on 2 years ago in Chicago. Vanguard Capital. They weren't investors. They were predatory lenders. They offered high-interest, short-term bridge loans to distressed companies, collateralized by hard assets. If you missed a payment, they didn't just sue you, they seized the equipment, the land, the inventory. I scanned the document. The loan was for $2 million. The collateral listed was the factory, the land it sat on, and my breath hitched. The family estate, this house. The signature at the bottom was Connor J. Reynolds. I zoomed in. The signature was shaky, slightly off-axis. It looked like Dad's handwriting, but wrong. It lacked the fluid loop of the R he had used his whole life. It was a forgery. A good one, but a forgery. Lucas hadn't just stolen money. He had mortgaged our parents' home, the roof over their heads, to a loan shark in a suit. And if the company defaulted, which my projections showed would happen in less than 90 days, Mom and Dad wouldn't just be broke. They would be homeless. I didn't sleep. I spent the night building the timeline, creating a visual map of the theft. By the time the sun began to bleed through the curtains, I had a dossier that could put Lucas in federal prison for 10 years. I showered, dressed in my sharpest blazer, armor for the modern woman, and went down to breakfast. The atmosphere in the dining room was brittle. Patricia was aggressively buttering toast. Dad was staring into his coffee. Lucas wasn't there yet. "Good morning," I said, pouring myself a cup of black coffee. "Is it?" Patricia snapped without looking up. "Lucas is very upset, Claire. He feels you were attacking him last night." "I was asking questions, Mom. There's a difference. He's your brother. You should support him, not interrogate him. He has taken on so much responsibility." "Responsibility?" I laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Is that what we're calling it?" Lucas walked in then, looking worse for wear. His eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled faintly of stale alcohol and expensive cologne. He stopped when he saw me, his jaw tightening. "Morning, darling," Patricia cooed, her demeanor instantly shifting to doting mother. "I asked Cook to make your favorite omelet." "Thanks, Mom," Lucas mumbled, sliding into his seat. He wouldn't look at me. "So," I began, buttering my own toast with deliberate slowness. "I was doing some reading last night. Fascinating stuff about Nevada corporate law." Lucas froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "What?" "Nevada," I repeated. "Specifically, the anonymity it provides for LLCs, like Apex Strategic Solutions. Does that ring a bell, Lucas?" The color drained from his face so fast it was almost impressive. I use a lot of vendors. I don't memorize every name." "Funny," I said, locking eyes with him. "Because you've paid them nearly $500,000 in the last 6 months for consulting. I was just wondering, what exactly do they consult on? Is it marketing, or is it vintage car restoration?" Patricia slammed her hand down on the table. "Enough, Claire. I will not have you badgering him at the breakfast table. Apex is a legitimate firm. Lucas told me about them. They are helping us restructure." "Restructure what, Mom?" I asked, turning to her. "Our assets into his pocket, because I matched the transfer dates. March 14th, June 2nd. Every time Apex gets a check, Lucas gets a new toy or goes on a trip." "That is a coincidence," Patricia shouted, her face flushing pink. "Lucas has his own money. He had savings from his time in the city." "He was fired from his job in the city for cause, Mom. He had 0 savings. He moved back here because he was broke." "Liar," Lucas shouted, standing up. "You're a jealous, bitter liar. You're just trying to poison them against me because you can't stand that I won." "Sit down, Lucas," Dad's voice cut through the noise. It was weak but firm. We all turned to look at him. Connor was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "Connor, don't upset yourself," Patricia fluttered. "I said sit down," Connor repeated, looking directly at his son. Lucas sat, looking like a petulant child. "Claire," Dad said, looking at me with wet, pleading eyes. You said there was more." "Yes, Dad," I said softly. "There's a lot more." "Show them," he whispered. "No one is showing anything," Lucas yelled, panic rising in his voice. "This is my company. I am the CEO. I don't answer to her." "You're not the CEO yet," I reminded him coldly. "The papers aren't signed until Monday." "Mom," Lucas pleaded, turning to Patricia. "Make her stop. She's making this up. She's hacked my computer. That's illegal. I can sue her." "You could," I agreed. "But then you'd have to explain the Vanguard Capital loan in Discovery, and I don't think you want to do that." The room went dead silent. Lucas looked like he had been shot. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Patricia looked confused. "Vanguard? What is Vanguard?" "Ask him, Mom," I said, pointing a steady finger at my brother. "Ask him what he signed Dad's name to." "I don't know what she's talking about," Lucas stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. It's a line of credit, standard business practice, to smooth out cash flow." "A $2 million line of credit?" I asked. "At 18% interest, collateralized by this house." Patricia let out a small gasp. She looked at the walls around her, at the portraits of her ancestors, as if they were suddenly fading away. "The house? Lucas, you promised. You said the estate was safe. You said the business assets were separate." "They are," Lucas lied, his voice cracking. "She's misinterpreting the contract. It's a cross-collateralization clause. It's technical. It never gets triggered unless there's a catastrophe." "Which there will be," I interjected. "Because you've stripped the operating capital. The suppliers aren't being paid, Lucas. I saw the accounts payable aging report. You're 90 days past due with the steel supplier. 60 days with the logistics firm. You're using the Vanguard loan to pay the interest on the other debts you racked up." "Shut up," Lucas screamed, slamming his fist on the table. "You don't know what it's like. The pressure. Dad left me a mess. The machinery is old, the market is changing. I had to take risks. Dad left you a company with $3 million in reserves and zero debt, I countered. You burned it in 24 months. It's not my fault, Lucas shouted, and there it was, the mantra of his life. It's not my fault. I needed capital to modernize, and Marcus said this was the only way to get liquidity fast without going through the banks who ask too many questions. Marcus, I pounced on the name, is that your contact at Apex? Lucas clamped his mouth shut, realizing he'd slipped. You're being scammed, you idiot, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. This Marcus guy isn't a consultant. He's bleeding you dry, and you're handing him the knife. Stop it, Patricia shrieked, covering her ears. Stop it, both of you, I can't take this. She looked at Connor, her eyes wide and terrified. Connor, tell her she's wrong. Tell her Lucas wouldn't do this. Dad slowly reached into his jacket pocket. His hand shook as he pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the mahogany table toward Patricia. I found this, Connor whispered, in the trash, in his study. Patricia picked it up with trembling fingers. It was a draft notice from a collection agency, addressed to Lucas, for a gambling debt of $40,000. This is from last year, Connor said, before the Apex payment started. Patricia stared at the paper, then she looked at Lucas. For the first time in my life, I saw the blindfold slip. She didn't see her golden boy, she saw a stranger. You gamble, she whispered. It was just for fun, Lucas cried, his defense crumbling into whining. Everyone does it. I was networking. I met investors at the tables. You stole from the company to pay bookies, I corrected him. And when that wasn't enough, you mortgaged the house. I can fix it. Lucas stood up, knocking his chair over. He paced frantically around the room. I just need the title transfer on Monday. Once the assets are in my name, I can refinance. I have a deal lined up, a big deal. It will cover everything. But I need the title. He turned to Mom, desperation wild in his eyes. Mom, you have to sign. If you don't sign on Monday, the deal falls through. And then it gets bad. How bad? I asked. Lucas looked at me, and I saw genuine terror. Not of me, but of someone else. They don't like waiting, Claire. Who doesn't? Vanguard, he whispered. They aren't just a bank. If I don't make the balloon payment next week, they take the keys. To the factory, Patricia asked. To everything, Lucas admitted, his voice a ghost. Patricia slumped back in her chair, looking like she had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed the hour, a funeral bell for the family legacy. I stood up, smoothing my blazer. The signing is scheduled for Monday at noon with the family attorney, right? Yes, Patricia whispered. Good, I said. Do. And cancel it. Lucas looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. You agree? You want me to sign? Oh, no, I smiled, and it was the coldest thing I had ever done. I don't want you to sign anything, Lucas, but we need everyone in that room. Because I'm going to bring something to that meeting that you can't gaslight away. And by the time we leave that office, one of us will be running this company, and the other will be lucky to stay out of jail. I looked at my watch. I have to make a phone call. I suggest you don't leave the house, Lucas. I've already flagged your passport with the State Department as part of a pending fraud investigation. You're not going anywhere. I turned and walked out, leaving my brother shaking in the ruins of his own hubris. The investigation was over. Now, it was time for the execution. Monday morning arrived with the color of bruised iron. The sky was a flat, slate gray, hanging low over the city as I drove my parents to the law offices of Henderson and Wright. The silence in the car was absolute. I was driving. Dad sat in the passenger seat, his hands folded over his cane, staring out the window at the passing blur of the city he had helped build. Patricia sat in the back, rigid and pale, looking less like a matriarch and more like a defendant on her way to sentencing. Lucas had driven himself. I had seen his car weaving slightly as he pulled out of the driveway ahead of us. Mr. Henderson's office was a shrine to old money. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs that groaned when you sat in them, and shelves lined with legal tomes that probably hadn't been opened since the Reagan administration. Mr. Henderson himself was a man of similar vintage, wearing a bow tie and an expression of perpetual, polite confusion. "Well then," Mr. Henderson said, shuffling a stack of thick, cream-colored documents on the massive desk. "This is a significant day. It is rare to see a succession plan executed with such decisiveness." He beamed at us, oblivious to the fact that he was presiding over a funeral, not a coronation. "Lucas," Henderson said, sliding a heavy binder toward my brother. "These are the transfer deeds for the manufacturing plant, the operational accounts, and the title transfer for the Reynolds estate. Once signed, you will be the sole proprietor and executor." Lucas reached for the pen. His hand was shaking so badly that the Mont Blanc rattled against the desk surface. He looked terrible. His skin was pasty, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit. "And Claire," Henderson continued, turning to me with a pitying smile, "your mother has indicated that a trust has been set up with a modest stipend to acknowledge your independence." "That won't be necessary, Arthur," I said, my voice cutting through the stuffy air like a scalpel. Henderson blinked. "I beg your pardon." "Put the pen down, Lucas," I said. I didn't look at the lawyer. I looked straight at my brother. Lucas gripped the pen tighter, his knuckles turning white. "Just sign the papers, Mom. Ignore her. She's just trying to drag this out." "If you sign those papers, Mom," I said, turning my body to face Patricia, "you trigger the change of control clause in the Vanguard loan agreement Lucas signed 3 months ago. Do you know what that means?" Patricia looked at me, her eyes wide and frightened. "No." "It means the entire $2 million becomes due immediately," I explained, keeping my tone conversational but deadly. "Not next month. Today, the moment the title changes hands, the debt is called. And since the company accounts are empty, Vanguard will exercise their lien on the house. By Friday, you and Dad will be evicted." "That's a lie," Lucas shouted, standing up. "It's a standard clause, they won't enforce it." "I spoke to them this morning," I lied. I hadn't spoken to them, but I knew the type. Vulture capitalists don't have mercy, they have algorithms. They are waiting for the filing. They have a foreclosure team on standby. Mr. Henderson looked from Lucas to me, his professional veneer cracking. "What is this? What loan? The estate is unencumbered." "Not anymore," I said. I reached into my briefcase, the leather heavy and reassuring in my hand, and pulled out a thick file. I slammed it onto the desk. "This is a forensic audit of the last 24 months, I announced. "It details 47 separate instances of embezzlement, wire fraud, and misappropriation of funds totaling $640,000, all funneled to offshore shell companies controlled by Lucas." I pulled out a second document, a single sheet of paper protected by a plastic sleeve. "And this," I said, sliding it toward Mr. Henderson, "is the Vanguard loan agreement. Arthur, you've represented my father for 30 years. Look at the signature." Henderson adjusted his spectacles, leaning over the paper. He squinted, frowned, and then recoiled as if the paper were hot. "Connor," he asked, looking at my father, "did you sign this?" Dad didn't speak, he just slowly shook his head. "It's a forgery," Henderson whispered, the horror dawning on him. "A clumsy one at that." "It's fraud, Arthur," I corrected. "Federal bank fraud. And since the loan was secured using the U.S. mail system, it's also mail fraud. We're looking at 15 to 20 years. Minimum." The room went silent, a heavy, suffocating silence that pressed against our eardrums. Lucas slumped back into his chair, the pen rolling out of his hand and clattering onto the floor. He put his head in his hands and began to sob. Not the crying of a repentant man, but the terrified, ugly sobbing of a child who has finally been caught. "Mom," Lucas wailed, his voice muffled by his palms. "Mom, please, you have to help me. They'll kill me. If I don't pay them, they'll kill me." Patricia stared at him. She looked at the sobbing wreck of her golden boy, the son she had elevated above everything else. Then she looked at the spreadsheet I had left open on the table, showing the dates of the transfers. The dates of her anniversary. The dates of Dad's surgeries. Days when Lucas was supposedly working late, saving the company, while he was actually bleeding it dry to feed his addiction. "You knew," Patricia whispered. Her voice was trembling. "You knew this whole time, when you asked for the inheritance. You weren't trying to build a future, you were trying to use us as a shield." "I had no choice," Lucas screamed, lifting his tear-streaked face. "I was in a hole, I just needed time. If you sign the business over to me, I can sell the factory equipment. I can strip the assets. I can pay them back." "Sell the equipment?" Dad spoke up. His voice was stronger now, fueled by a deep, volcanic anger. "You would strip the factory, you would fire the men and women who have worked for us for decades, just to save your own skin." "I'm your son," Lucas yelled. "Does that mean nothing?" "I have a daughter, too," Dad said, looking at me with a pride I hadn't seen in years. "A daughter I ignored because I was too busy protecting you." Patricia stood up. She walked over to the desk, her movements slow and deliberate. She picked up the transfer deed, the document that would have given Lucas everything. She looked at it for a long moment. Then, with a strength I didn't know she possessed, she tore it in half, then in quarters. She dropped the confetti of her shattered dreams onto the desk. "Get out," Patricia said. Lucas blinked. "What?" "Get out," she repeated, her voice rising to a shriek. "Get out of this office. Get out of my house. Get out of my life." "Mom." "Don't you dare call me that," she hissed, pointing a shaking finger at the door. "You were willing to let us lose our home. You were willing to let your father die in the street just to cover your mistakes. You aren't a son, you're a parasite." Lucas looked at Henderson, then at Dad, and finally at me. He saw no mercy in any of our eyes. He scrambled out of the chair, grabbing his keys, and bolted from the room. We heard the heavy oak door slam shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Patricia collapsed back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Dad reached out and took her hand, anchoring her. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, looking thoroughly shaken. "Well, I suppose we need to discuss a new arrangement." I stepped forward, taking the seat Lucas had vacated. I picked up the pen he had dropped. "Yes, Arthur," I said, opening my laptop. "We do. First, we need to file an immediate injunction to freeze the Vanguard loan based on fraudulent origination. I've already drafted the affidavit for Dad to sign. Second, we need to file a police report regarding the identity theft. It's the only way to void the debt." "A police report?" Patricia looked up, her eyes red. "Against Lucas, Claire, he'll go to prison." I looked at my mother. I saw the mother who had told me I was doing fine on my own. The mother who had dismissed my pneumonia as a nuisance. "That is his choice, Mom," I said gently but firmly. "He committed the crime. We can either let him face the consequences, or we can let him take this family down with him. But I am not going to let him destroy what Dad built. And I am certainly not going to let him take your home." Patricia looked at Dad. He nodded slowly. "Do it," Dad said. "Do whatever you have to do, Claire. We trust you." The fallout was ugly, messy, and long. Just the way I like it, because mess implies that things are being cleaned up. I moved back into the estate for 3 months, not as a daughter, but as a crisis manager. I took a leave of absence from my firm, telling them I had a family emergency. That was the understatement of the century. The first week was a blur of legal motions. With Mr. Henderson's help and my aggressive pushing, we managed to get a temporary rest. Reigning order against Vanguard Capital. When we presented the evidence of the forged signature and the fact that their loan officer was a known predator operating without a state license, they backed off. They knew that a discovery process would expose their entire illegal operation. They agreed to void the lien in exchange for us not reporting them to the SEC. The debt was gone, but the company was still hollowed out. I fired the entire management team Lucas had hired, his drinking buddies who were on the payroll as consultants. I renegotiated payment terms with every single supplier, using every ounce of goodwill my father's name still carried. I instituted strict financial controls. I put padlocks on the inventory. And Lucas, he was arrested 2 days after the meeting at the lawyer's office. He was caught trying to board a flight to Mexico using a credit card he had stolen from Patricia's purse before he fled the house. We didn't press charges for the full extent of the corporate embezzlement. Mom couldn't bear it. But we didn't stop the DA from pursuing him for the identity theft and the bank fraud regarding the credit cards. He took a plea deal. 3 years in a minimum security facility, followed by 5 years of probation. I visited him once before the sentencing. He was sitting in the visitor's room, wearing an orange jumpsuit that washed out his complexion. He looked smaller. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a sullen, childish resentment. "Are you happy?" he asked me, refusing to meet my eyes. "You won, you got the company, you got the house, you got everything." "I didn't want any of it, Lucas," I said honestly. "I have my own life, I have my own career, I'm doing this for them, I'm cleaning up your mess." "You always thought you were better than me," he sneered. "I never thought I was better," I said, standing up to leave. "I just knew that actions have consequences. You never learned that. I hope you learn it in here." I walked out and never looked back. The reconciliation with my parents was quieter, less dramatic, but harder. One evening, about 4 months after the explosion, I was in the study, finalizing the Q2 projections. The company was back in the black barely, but we were solvent. The bleeding had stopped. Mom walked in, carrying a tray of tea. She set it down on the desk, moving a stack of invoices to make room. She lingered, her hand resting on the back of the leather chair where Dad used to sit, where I now sat. "You've saved us, Claire," she said softly. "I did my job, Mom." "No," she shook her head. "You did more than that. You were the strong one I always said." "I always said you were fine on your own. I thought that was a compliment. I thought I was saying that I didn't need to worry about you." She looked down at her hands. "But I realized I ignored you because it was easy. Lucas needed me. He needed my attention, my money, my energy. You never asked for anything, so I gave you nothing." I stopped typing. It was the apology I had waited 30 years to hear. "It's okay, Mom," I said, though it wasn't, not really. But it was a start. "It's not okay," she said firmly. "We almost lost everything because I was blind. I'm sorry, Claire. I am so, so sorry." Dad walked in then, looking healthier than he had in years. The stress of the secret was gone, and with it, much of his frailty. He walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "We amended the trust today," Dad said. "The business, it's yours, 100%. When we're gone or whenever you want it, it's yours." I looked at the spreadsheets on the screen, the orderly rows of numbers, the logic, the truth. "I don't want to run it forever," I told them. "I have a life in the city, but I'll find a CEO who can, someone honest, and I'll stay on as chairman of the board. I'll keep watching the numbers." Dad smiled. "That sounds like a good plan." I looked out the window at the estate grounds. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. It was finally peaceful. They had tried to give the kingdom to the prince, not realizing the castle was made of cards. In the end, it was the independent daughter, the one they thought didn't need them, who had to come back and rebuild the walls, brick by brick. I wasn't the heir they wanted, but I was the savior they needed. And honestly, that was a legacy I could live with.